were you ever told directly, like, you seem a little too emotional on this topic?
I've often been told that, but it hasn't stopped me from being passionate.
For women trying to break into a field, how can you be taken as seriously as possible, especially when you're dealing with these old boys club or a very male-centric field?
Well, I mean, the best strategy for beating the boys club is success. Frankly, when I was at Vanity Fair, I beat the boys at their own game in journalism again and again. I just outscoot them every time. Not every time, but a lot of times. And certainly didn't always make friends, but at the same time, it's the best answer to anyone who says you can't do it. I do think that women need to psych themselves up a little more sometimes for the battle that it's going to be, because I think women tend to still be surprised that it takes so much to get their just desserts, and there does need to be some strategy. And I do think that other women, unfortunately, don't always support each other in the way that they need to. They need to amplify the other women that they're working with and make sure that a good idea from a woman gets heard in a meeting. I mean, we hear it again and again. Every woman has been through it, where you're sitting in a meeting with, there's 2 women and 7 men, and you have say something, your idea, and nothing happens. And then suddenly, a man in the group says it, and all of a sudden, oh, it's a great idea, Jeff. What an interesting idea. Let's proceed with that idea. And that is exceedingly irritating. And I think, even in the Obama cabinet, you heard women complaining about that in the cabinet. And what they said the strategy was to actually help to amplify another woman in the group, saying, well, as Susan said just now, that's a really good idea, and get that sense, that spotlight to the person who said it, because women do feel still, unfortunately, that they have to overcompensate constantly for their own success, that they have to be overqualified for that success, that they have to say frequently, well, I can't put in for that job because I really haven't done X, Y, and Z. That means that I'm, ready for the job. And it really doesn't occur very often to the men applying for the job. It wouldn't stop them applying for the job. I mean, maybe they shouldn't get the job because they're not qualified, but frequently they still apply. Whereas a woman would say, well, I'm not ready to apply. And that, I think, is a real self-censoring thing that women do and need to get over.
I know you have a daughter. Is there anything that you ever told her, or tried in a way to bring her up in a way that would then help her not be that self-censoring?
Well, it's interesting to me about the millennial generation, because I would have thought that, given that the barriers are so much less than they were, and they really are. I mean, obviously the younger generation do not have it as difficult or as impeding as their mothers have. Nonetheless, they still have the same issues. They still have the same issues of feeling that the bros in the company are somehow higher rewarded and more listened to and more considered than they are. And it's true of all the millennial girls I know. I hear them talking, and they're complaining about those issues a lot. And I think it's an issue that they need to address, but there's nothing better, frankly, than having strong conviction in something. I mean, the truth is that you lose your shyness or you lose your lack of confidence if you really passionately believe in something. I mean, and that's in the end how I got ahead, was because I didn't stop and ask myself, am I really ready for this? I just jumped because I wanted to do it so badly. I was convinced that I knew how to do it. Therefore, I went, absolutely charging out for that goal. And it was only afterwards that I might have thought, wow, how do we do that? Well, we did it because we were so passionately believing in it. So I think that young women need to really ask themselves, am I passionate enough to go charging ahead? Am I going to just jump in or sit here saying, well, why aren't I being noticed? I really ought to be promoted. I really should. Forget that. If you're going to sit there and whine and self-reflect and kind of, have your little self-help groups, it's fine, and that's all very nice. But at the end of the day, if you don't have enough passionate conviction that you're the right person to do it, and if you don't have the courage to jump in and try and fail, then probably you shouldn't be doing that job.
Cool. That's awesome. I love that. So I just wanted to touch on the very start of your career. You were coming out of Oxford and started writing, and then somehow transitioned into the Tatler. How did that happen? And I mean, was there anything during that time that might speak to young women as far as like how to jump in, as you were saying?
Well, I started my journalism career writing for so many people do, writing for the school magazine at Oxford. And I was going to just be a writer, and that's what I wanted to be, as a writer. But then gradually I began to feel frustrated by the assignments I was getting. And I began to think, I'm better than these assignments. And wouldn't it be great just to be doing the assigning? And I was, Tatler at that time was a very small magazine. It had 10,000 circulation. It was an old title, but a kind of a dying brand, if you like. And it was bought by a new entrepreneur, and he was looking for someone to edit it. And somehow somebody suggested, he said, if you can't get anybody really experienced, maybe you should go young. These articles by this young woman who's been writing at Oxford are really interesting. Take a look. I met with him, and I suddenly realized how great it would be to run my own show. And he took a bet on me. And what I would actually, my advice to anybody who's really ambitious and wants to get a chance, always look at the small things that are unpromising rather than necessarily being a cog in a big machine. I mean, if I had joined instead to go and work for, I don't know, the New York Times, I would have probably been ending up somebody's assistant making coffee, because I was only 25. But because I took over something that had a staff of 5 or 6, and was a sort of, nobody cared whether it succeeded or failed. I had a budget of £10,000 a year at that time. I had tremendous playground. It was my sandbox, and I hired my friends, who were all these sort of smart kids, these young Turks from Oxford and elsewhere, and we just put out the magazine we wanted to put out, and it took off. It took off like a bucking bronco pretty fast, actually. It had a lot of attitude, as it's now called. In a way, it was a bit akin to an internet startup. It was a bunch of kids, small budget, a lot of attitude, and it really worked. It took off immediately, and Tatler was a social magazine, if you like a kind of, and we turned it into a much more edgy thing. And we also were blessed with a great story, which was the rise of Princess Diana, because, this was the period where she began to date Prince Charles, and then she became, of course, the Princess of Wales. It was a huge story everywhere. I mean, not just in the UK. And many of our staff members knew her because she was sort of the same age, really. I mean, a little bit younger, but she was very much in the world of the Tatler. So we became the go-to shop, if you like, on Princess Diana, and we kind of owned that story, as they say today, and rode that story and became the kind of place that everybody would come to for the soundbite and so forth, and it really helped our sales. And by the time we were done, by the time 3 or 4 years had gone, we had really taken the sales to 100,000 from 10, and we were bought by Condé Nast magazines, which of course then brought me to the US to edit Vanity Fair and the New Yorker. So my advice actually to young people wondering, where should they dive in if they, for instance, ultimately want to be an editor, or whatever it is actually they want to be, is rather than go into something that's a big organization where they're going to be a sort of small cog in the wheel, take over something that is small, maybe ailing, something that needs help, something where you can make a difference and develop the heck out of it and be the one who has the idea to how to reinvent it. And very often it could be a division in a company where everybody says, oh, you wouldn't want to work there, that's just not the hot division, all the action is over here. It's the one that isn't hot that's the place to make your mark, because you can go in and you can be the person who reinvents, and then it's all yours, and it's very much more exciting.
So when you were at Vanity Fair, did you come up against anything that you felt like you were not being taken seriously on, especially on the business side of things?
When I was editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair, particularly 2 or 3 years in when I'd really turned the magazine around and made it into a commercial success, I used to get very vexed because the business side of the operation really kept me out of the discussions of the business strategy. And it was a kind of, don't bother your little head about this, we're doing the big boy stuff. And frankly, there's no one who knows more about what a business strategy of a magazine really should be than the editor-in-chief who's turned it round. So that I found exceedingly irritating. And at a certain point, they were talking about global expansion, and I was never sort of really involved in the discussion. And I said, why don't we take the existing editorial of Vanity Fair and launched it in the UK where I'm very well known, and simply change the advertising and just tweak a little bit in the cover lines to make it better for the market, and you're going to have a whole new magazine without any overhead. And actually they did, and it became an enormous success, and it still is a great success and part of the revenue success of Vanity Fair. So that was a nice moment. But then, it went right on after that, where I wasn't consulted about launching it in Europe, and in fact it didn't work because they put in the wrong editor and the wrong publisher, and it didn't work. But I guess I was lucky that they listened to me on that, but I came to feel that it was a battle I had to keep winning every time.
Was there any moment that you can speak to when you did feel that you won in a way, like when you, for example, presented that idea to them and they accepted it?
Well, I came to see that it was very important to always present my ideas in writing first, as a matter of fact, because that way I could sort of take any lack of confidence, if you like, out of the verbal presentation, because I'm always better in writing than I am in person, or certainly was at that time. I had a lack of confidence, if you like, in certain business situations, but on the page I could be very confident and knew how to put my words together so that it felt as lacking in kind of emotion, quote, as male executives often like to feel about a passionate executive. Personally, I think passion is what you want from an executive, but when you want to get your ideas across and you are dealing with a certain sexist environment, it's quite smart to put it in writing, and that's what I always did. I always put my business thoughts in writing ahead of a meeting.
Were you ever told directly, like, you seem a little too emotional on this topic?
I've often been told that, but it hasn't stopped me from being passionate. Post this last election, women have been motivated. There's been something of a gender quake, something of an Arab Spring for women, if you like, in which women have suddenly thought, wait a minute, we really could lose our rights here. We could really wind up, without any health care for women who, hard-pressed women who have no other kind of health care could actually end up with no clinic in which they can have prenatal care, antenatal care, mammograms, all the things, for instance, that Planned Parenthood supplies. We could wind up in a situation where Roe v. Wade is overturned. We could wind up in a situation where the criminal justice reforms that, that have been so impactful on women are going to be rolled back. All of these things have got women suddenly really focused. And so you're seeing political action, women running, the organizations that are training women on how to run for office are overflowing with people applying. Suddenly women aren't saying, well, am I qualified to really run for the local state legislature? They're thinking, I have to get in there and run, because if I don't, someone else is going to get into that job who once again, starts chipping away at my rights, my freedoms, my life, And it's very different when it gets personal, and it's exciting, actually. I mean, I do see us in the middle of a huge second, or maybe it's the third wave at this point, a huge third wave, if you like, of feminism. It's a great awakening.